Welcome to Startup Different. This week, we're excited to welcome a Sherpa, specifically a Business Transition Sherpa, to the show. Laurie Barkman, the Business Transition Sherpa, is the former CEO of a $100 million revenue company that was sold to a Fortune 50. She guides business owners through the often overwhelming process of transition planning and facilitates sell-side and buy-side transactions in the lower middle market. Laurie is an adjunct faculty member at Carnegie Mellon University, Amazon best-selling author of the Business Transition Handbook, and host of the award-winning Succession Stories podcast and the new show, The Entrepreneur Gene. And she's here to kick off Season 5. This is the Startup Different podcast, hosted by successful entrepreneurs and brothers Dave and Chris Sinkinson. We're here to bust startup myths and give you the insights you need to help you reach your startup dreams. Hello, folks, and welcome to Startup Different. I'm Dave. He's Chris. Today, we are very excited to have our first episode of Season 5. Can you believe that? 5 seasons already. That's fantastic news. And we're here with Laurie Barkman. Laurie, as we said in the intro, is incredibly qualified. Honestly, not really sure what she's doing here today. I'm really happy to have her here on the show, but she outranks us and a half. Laurie, welcome to the program. How are you doing today?
Hey, I'm awesome. Thanks, guys, for having me.
Oh, thank you for being here. Laurie, like you're, so many different things. You've got obviously your book and your podcast. You're also a professor. You've been a president of a division of a huge company. It's incredible. And I think our audience today has a lot to learn from you. And I think that's what we really want to get at. And I'd love, though, for you to start us off with sort of the basics. Everybody loves a good sort of career story. Can you take us from, maybe this is a bit ridiculous, but from somewhere around your first job to how you became, now the, business sort of transition Sherpa? Like, how did that happen? And then as a follow-up, I will probably also have a question as to why you chose the name Sherpa. So just heads up for that, but that's coming around the corner as well.
Absolutely. I'm happy to dive in with the origin story as it goes. And the Cliff Notes is that I had a career in marketing and then as a CEO. And I think all the way through, I've been a closeted entrepreneur. So the quick rewind back to my first days out of college, I worked in human resource management for a very large global manufacturing company. And people would be like, oh, what's human resources? And I would always describe it as the psychology of business. But after 4 years of working in that company, I realized I didn't want to be so much on the sidelines. I wanted to be more frontline. And I had this vision of becoming a CEO. So here I am, still a young whippersnapper right out of college. But I set my target in my life to say, yeah, I want that. I want that. I want to go be a CEO. And flash forward, the way I ended up taking my career as in a different path, got my MBA because I not only wanted to switch my career field from HR to something else, and what I wanted to go into was marketing. I also wanted to switch my industry from manufacturing to technology. And back then it was, and I think it's still hard today to do something like that, like be a double switcher. And so the MBA, getting my MBA was a catalyst for that. And that's what moved me to where I live, which is Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania in the States. And I went to Carnegie Mellon University, and Carnegie Mellon's going to come back in this story. So that's why I'm double clicking on it right now. And that's what got me started in the world of startups. Here I am, this closeted entrepreneur who really wants to create a business, but doesn't have the big idea. I'm not a tech founder, didn't have a tech founder partner, didn't have funding, and was like, risk. And I have this MBA loan to pay back. And my husband and I, it just wasn't the right time, But the step into an entrepreneurial environment for me was joining a corporate startup. And that corporate startup happened to be the e-commerce platform of a major apparel retailer in the US and now global. And the name of the company is American Eagle Outfitters. So that was an amazing e-commerce experience on the early digital team. Yeah. And so that might be, if you have teenagers, people probably know the brand. And it was an incredible, incredible experience in this corporate startup. I wasn't there day one, but I remember when we all got the t-shirts celebrating 75 million in revenue. And you can only imagine, how big they are today.
Wow.
So that was a really great entry point to a world of being in the digital commerce arena, right? And understanding what drives transaction, customer acquisition, as well as what now is ubiquitous, right? We all are familiar with the term omni-channel, right? Or multi-channel. But back in those days, it was very single channel, single threaded. And we were pushing the envelope really, really hard on multi-channel, and it was omni-channel, and it was a great, great experience. And from there, I just continued to build my skills and leadership capabilities in larger opportunities. At a different company, I ended up having $100 million budget responsibility for marketing and all aspects of marketing, from the measured marketing to activations all across the North America. And it was really cool. I liked that role a lot. I liked being on the growth side of the, of the income statement, but at the same time recognized that I still wanted this objective as a CEO. And as things go in our careers, you have your Rolodex, and I still have all the business cards. I love having the business cards. And here was an opportunity from my past, a recruiter who had not placed me anywhere, but he specializes in e-commerce. And he called me and he said, I have a CEO position for a person with an e-commerce background, which is why I'm calling you, Laurie. And I think you would be a great fit. And as things go, it worked out. It was with a privately held company in Pittsburgh, where I am. And they had two digital businesses. One was B2B, one was B2C. This was part of a long-term succession plan. The division I was ultimately became CEO of was about 10% of $1 billion company. So you can do the math. It was over 100 million in revenue. And it was a very exciting opportunity for someone like me in my young 40s to get P&L responsibility and take that unit to the next level. And you asked about Sherpa, and this is really where the Sherpa story starts, for me. The company was acquired, and it was acquired kind of out of the blue. The third generation owners were excellent. I mean, we had a board of directors, outside board of directors. There were all kinds of involvement from the executive members, including myself. And this is a very well-run company, and it attracted a strategic acquirer. And what we didn't know is that the strategic acquirer is a global transportation logistics company, had been looking at our business from afar for about 6 years, and we had no idea. Wow. And the acquisition happened in 2015, and ever since then, I've reflected on that experience. I've reflected on the growth, the innovation, and the transition that third generation company went through to get to where, ultimately for that successful exit. And then that was just the beginning for the family. Obviously, things continue in the enterprise of a family. And then for me, wanting to put together for entrepreneurs and business owners a solution that helps them consider the innovation, growth, and transition that doesn't enable, you can't turn all those things on when you're exiting, right? You have to really build into it. And with my strategy background, my C-suite experience, I think I ultimately became uniquely qualified. Also got certified as a mergers and acquisitions advisor to do transactions. And I kind of put it all together with this toolkit that I know we'll talk more in depth about. But that's the Sherpa idea, is that it's a movement from here to there, right? The Sherpa is with you on your journey and guiding you. I don't have all the answers. I have tools, I have frameworks, and I have life experiences and client experiences and the podcast, and pulling it all together and putting it all together for my clients in a way that helps them make big decisions, helps them get out of their head, right? Helps them create their own track of what they should be doing and when and why and all those things. And that's the Sherpa.
Cool. Very cool. Very, very cool. So let me just see here. So you said a lot of things. So I want to make sure I get to this. On the big acquisition. So you were president of part of a company that was acquired for over $1 billion. And that company the whole thing was a family-owned affair. I find that kind of interesting too. And even though, so it came out of the blue. So were you not actually involved in the due diligence of that at all? Like, did you not see that coming, even though you had a more senior role on that team, or how did, I'm interested in that a little bit.
So due diligence is different than the initial outreach, right? So the initial outreach was out of the blue, and we call it a bluebird. So that little bluebird came a knocking,
Bluebird,
and it's a big reason why I say to my clients, and I say on my podcast, is called Succession Stories. So just to kind of put it out there, and you guys have been on the show, and you you've been through your exit, and I know you know what that means, but just to kind of translate it for a bit. If you or another entrepreneur have a business that could be sold at any time, isn't that a good thing, right? Because that means you have a very well-run company that's able to be transferred and is attractive. And this company in its state that it was in its third generation, every generation that got the baton, they did something different for innovation. And my experience in that company and having an appreciation for what that means, right? The further we get from our entrepreneurial roots, the harder it is. But every time the next generation got the baton, they did do something differently. And that also stuck with me and influenced me. I know you want to talk about Corporate Startup Lab at Carnegie Mellon, and we definitely will. And there's another thread there, right? In my experience, I talked about the corporate startup at American Eagle, the corporate startup that ultimately, the innovation, we can't lose innovation as we get further and further away from our entrepreneurial roots. So back to your question. The entire executive team, which did include myself, was involved in due diligence. And it's another part of my experience and why I stress to owners that this is a marathon and not a sprint, right? And you got to keep your eye on the ball when you're going through the diligence process. You cannot let up on the gas of your business. You can't let things fall through. If a transaction takes, and it can take 6 months to a year, and you just, start to ignore key parts of your business, what's going to happen? Well, you might get a retraded deal at the end of the day, or the deal might fall apart. And we were fortunate in that we had very talented executive team members, and then we had skip level people involved who had signed non-disclosure agreements and were part of the due diligence, filling up the data room. I mean, there was so much getting filed into that electronic data room. It could not possibly be led on the shoulders of one or two people. So yeah, I was absolutely involved in due diligence. And I think another big part to stress, this was a publicly traded global company with a massive playbook of doing transactions. I think these points still should resonate no matter what size the company is. And the other point that I want to make about diligence in terms of who's involved and when is you really do be mindful of that. I call it the red team. Who's on your red team in terms of the deal, keeping it tight, keeping it small, and making sure that those people know that there is definitely a balance of getting, attention paid to the deal, because there is a fatigue that can set in if things drag on too long, that we've got to keep the pulse going and keep the metrics going and all the results going for the business in tandem.
Right. Hey, we're taking a short break to tell you some exciting news. Chris and I wrote a book. Surprise! It's called Startup Different, the myth-busting blueprint for your multi-million-dollar business, and it's available now. Like our show, we're trying to pay it forward to our fellow entrepreneurs. The book busts 33 business myths, tells some of our most hilarious stories, and gives you many of our best tools to build, scale, and exit your business. You'll find the book on all major online retailers, including Amazon. Check it out. We think it's pretty great. And now, back to the show.
So, Laurie, can I ask you a follow-up question on that? Because as you know, Dave and I, we went through our initial acquisition. So we were 15 people. So smaller company. Then after that, so for that initial acquisition, it was just Dave and I doing all the due diligence.
It was hell.
And we were on a rocket. We were on a really tight timeline. But we kept it really tight because it was just the two of us. So none of the staff knew about it. When it was announced that we were acquired, like everybody fell out of their chairs on a Zoom meeting that morning. Excuse me. The second time through, though, once we were then acquired, we are now part of a 250 person company doing about 100 million or so in revenue. Don't quote me on that. Might not be right.
About 80 million.
Okay.
About 80 million. Yeah.
Yeah. So that time, there was a lot more people involved in the due diligence, and it was the worst kept secret in that business. Like, people were coming to me and mentioning the company that was going to be acquiring us, kind of trying to feel out if I knew about it. And of course I knew about it, but I was keeping my lips shut because we didn't want to blow it. Is that typical? Or how does that typically go from like the small, 15-ish person company to then like the 250 person company? Is that common?
It can be anything in between, and it's really challenging, right? There's the water cooler talk that I don't know the sources of the leaks, in terms of that. In my experience, we kept it really tight. The group was fairly large, but we were dealing with a publicly traded company, and so I think the appreciation was, don't screw this up. Do not screw this up, and nobody wanted to screw it up, right? Everybody wanted to do right by the owners,
Yeah. I think that's kind of terrifying too. There's something about the publicly traded, because our initial transaction was so like relatively small, sort of under the 75 million threshold, that I think there's different legalities and you would probably know better than me that apply to it. But once the big acquisition came around of the company that bought us by Motorola for, just over $500 million, there's a lot more to that. It's a lot more complicated. There's a lot more legality. Like, I think your principles, I agree with you. Your principles of a small deal versus a big deal are pretty well the same, but at least in principle, if that makes sense. But I think that, once you get bigger, it just gets more complicated and a little bit scary, just a little bit more scary than sort of the small.
Just a little bit, but it's interesting. Yeah. Communications is often the hardest thing. It's so hard. There's so many variables. People always ask me, when do we do this, or how should we do that? When do we tell people? Who do we include, and by when? It's so complicated because it's easy to get it wrong. Even if we look at the playbooks of others and say, well, that worked well for them. Yeah. A classic, you guys said, like, you hadn't shared with employees prior to closing. And that's a variable. Some people make different choices there. And again, there's no one answer. I think the main thing is to know your people, your key people. And it's, for some acquirers, it is a requirement for key employees to sign off on an employment opportunity with the acquirer. And that was my experience. So in my experience, that was really, really important to the acquirer. They wanted to make sure the management team was all on board. And therefore we had, of course, we were going to be involved anyway. But in that example, let's say we weren't part of the deal team. We had to be brought in because they wouldn't have been able to close the transaction.
Yeah. That happened to us though too, didn't it?
Yeah.
Like, I think after a while, they really wanted to know whether or not some of our key people were in, but it was very late in the process.
And I think like we actually stayed around because we wanted to make sure that we could answer all the questions for our little nugget of that bigger company that was being acquired. If we had exited our business before that second acquisition had happened, I think it would have been much tougher for them to go through that due diligence process because we were fortunate in that we kind of cut our teeth on our own acquisition. So we knew what it was all about, but to take some of our former staff and throw them into that due diligence process in a publicly traded company, massive deal situation, that would have been much more.
It would have been a lot. It would have been a lot. I think you're definitely right about that. Okay. Very super interesting. All this transition stuff is pretty crazy. It's also like so high importance. And frankly, I love talking about it, but I also want to make sure we get to some other things. And the one thing I did want to talk about, assuming you want to as well, Laurie, is this corporate startup lab that you have going at Carnegie Mellon. Can you tell me about that? This sounds really interesting. I'd love some, I don't always like the term war stories, but I would love some good war stories there if you've got any. But yeah, I'm very, very interested. Tell me about that.
Yeah, it's a master's capstone class offered at Carnegie Mellon University, which means it's open to the university, not just the MBA school. The Tepper School of Business, we have MBA students that serve on the teams. We have Masters of Engineering, like mechanical, AI, data science. Carnegie Mellon in the US is very well known for computer science and artificial intelligence and things of that nature, and also design. And that's what makes this so interesting every year to get these students and bring them together. We have sponsors, corporate sponsors, who contribute their prompt and their interest in a project to the team, right? So they're sponsoring a team, and they
Okay.
get a team of about 6 very smart master students for a semester to work on the prompt, which is usually very vague, right? Lots of gray areas. And that's as you can expect. You're in a company and you're like, oh, I think we want to work on this thing. And it's a product idea
Yeah.
or a service idea. And these teams have to figure out a lot of stuff. And the Corporate Startup Lab was created by Sean Amirati about 6-7 years ago. And Sean is a venture capitalist. He is also a serial entrepreneur. So what came first? The serial entrepreneur, he sold a couple of businesses and eventually became a VC. So he has a very interesting perspective. He wrote a book called The Science of Growth. And that's what was the genesis of him creating the Corporate Startup Lab at Carnegie Mellon. Sean and I go way back. I served as CMO on one of his portfolio companies, and we just had a great rapport. And when I saw that he had launched CSL, that was one of his first phone calls. And I'm like, gee, I thought I was a weirdo, that I worked in these corporate startups and I was always like the intrapreneur in this larger established company. And I thought I was a weirdo. And he's like, no, you're not alone. There's so many out there. It's so cool. And I became part of the adjunct faculty for the course. And it's a team course. It kind of feels more consultative than lectures. We do lectures, but there's no straight up test. Like, this is a project course.
Right.
And at the end of the day,
right.
the client satisfaction is what's really, what really is impactful. And the process that we teach, or the frameworks that we teach, for those listening that might be familiar with Eric Ries and the business model canvas, that's a great tool. We've adapted that. We call it the corporate startup canvas, and a bunch of other tools that we teach the course. We offer executive education for companies that have an interest. We work with big name companies. I can't talk about the projects, but I can, drop a couple of logo names, but, big banks like PNC Bank and Verizon and Microsoft, and, lots of big companies that have innovation projects. It's not like these are the only things, but I think what I'm seeing as a trend is that large companies know they have to continue to invest, and they're ultimately trying to find transformative innovation and transformative growth. There's only, we look at what are examples of transformative growth versus incremental. So an incremental innovation is when new software comes out and it's like the next version. So it's essentially the same asset, an extension of the same asset to the same market, right? And then from there is different versions of an asset to new aspects of a market. And then, the combination thereof, it's kind of a 4x4 matrix. But the ultimate is when it's a totally new application of an asset to a totally new market. And I think one of the things that we've seen in recent years is the evolution of space tourism. Right. That industry just did not exist a few years ago. Right. And so this ultimate, not everybody's going to attain that ultimate transformative idea. But if we can get somewhere in between, it's really powerful for companies, especially as we think about COVID and the disruption. And I know there's been studies on this and published by, publications like Harvard Business Review, et cetera. And the study found that companies that continue to invest in R&D and that continue to invest in innovation, even when times are tough. You got to shore up your balance sheet. You're right. You got to do these things when times are tough, but don't let up on the innovation projects. And I had some great conversations with privately held companies during COVID. One in particular is a crane manufacturing company. And these are not small cranes. These are giant, big ass cranes that you install in giant warehouses. And I love talking to the owner about her R&D efforts and how during COVID, they really came up with ways to talk to the customers and engage and understand what pain points they have. And here's a big parallel. You're going to say, oh my God, how do these things connect? Well, here's one giant example of everything I've talked about. How do we connect the dots on it? And that is, if you are investing, right, and you're investing for the future, and you're saying my business could be more valuable, it could be better, it could be different. Are we just going to stay in our heads about it? Or are we going to talk to the market? Get out of your chair, get on Zoom, do what you got to do, and understand truly what pain points you're solving for the market, and then try to go do that. Now, when you go to sell your company, It's at a meta view. It's not a product or service. It's at a meta. And so the big message here is that your business should solve the problem for another entity. And who that entity is, we could obviously talk about. But that is the opportunity. And so dialing it back to my background in marketing, I think that's another big reason why I've gravitated to this field, because we're essentially packaging your company for sale. And we're not just saying, hey, we make these widgets. We're saying these widgets benefit life, or these widgets are doing these things that help solve a problem for you, company acquirer A.
Yeah, totally. It makes perfect sense to me.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting too. You mentioned a lot of like different things there, like around Eric Ries and kind of like these form and these structures and all these things that, obviously like we're business people, we've been in the market, but it is funny how when you hear a notion like, okay, you got to go out and like listen to your customers and like solve a problem and like these things, like this is super valuable insight. It's not even that, like it is hard to do in some cases, but it's not that hard. Like get out there, go try it, try the thing, and you will learn pretty quickly whether or not there's actually, a market to support it, or if it's actually like a real problem that people would, pay to solve, and I think this is kind of an interesting nuance, because sometimes people are like, well, I can make something. Okay. But like, does anyone care? Does it solve a problem?
I think you're describing me at this point. I was always like technology for technology's sake. And Dave was like, wait, does anybody actually want this?
Well, you just think of some solutions that are out there and you kind of get this feeling where you're like, this is like a solution looking for a problem.
Right.
And it might have traction behind it because, some investors are in it or whatever, but and it's not that I like super dislike crypto or something like that, but sometimes I feel that way about crypto because it's like, well, it's cool, it's interesting, and there's a bunch of stuff going on there. But at the end of the day, it's like I'm pretty cool with like government tender. Like I don't, you know what I mean? Yeah. Like, is it really, but it's I'm sure we're gonna get some hate for this. So I apologize to all the crypto people in the universe, but that's another thing I want to throw out there. Okay, so two more things for you, really, really quickly, Laurie. So I am going to ask you about startup myth. Is my favorite question, and if you have one and that whole thing. But before we get there, I want to make sure we get to obviously the Business Transition Handbook, your podcast. Tell us more about that, how that's going, and where people can find out more information.
Yeah, absolutely. So the book is called the Business Transition Handbook, and it is a wonderful resource. And I'm not just saying because I'm the author, but people have told me how it's really helping them build their business with an end in mind. And, you could read the Amazon reviews and so on. And if you want to get your own digital copy as a thank you for listening to the show, you can go to my website, which is thebusinesstransitionSherpa.com, and, get your digital copy for free. And so that's my gift to you. And I want you to read it. I want you to write in it. If you get the paper version, if you get the PDF digital version, it's fine. Whatever you got to do to make it come live for you. And that's a really big reason that I've created a course to take it to the next level. I know that as a Sherpa, people like to have a framework and have a path, but they also may enjoy, in addition to the DIY side of it, having a little more help and support. And so being true to the Sherpa brand, we're offering a course and this master class also with group advisory support and some coaching so that people feel supported along the way, because these decisions are not easy and the path is hard, right? Let's face it. So I'm really, really excited about that. And people can learn about the course. It's called Endgame Entrepreneurship. And that also is available on my site. And so if people sign up for the newsletter, that's the best way to kind of be in touch with everything. But if they want to DM me on LinkedIn, awesome, that would be amazing. And just let me know that you heard me on Startup Different. And I think, guys, also as a thank you for the listeners, if you want to offer, I think would be amazing that we'll have a special offer for them in the show notes that they can take advantage of.
Yeah, let's do it.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Check it out. Show notes, folks. We'll have a special deal for you for sure, for all of Laurie's awesome stuff. Oh, that's very nice of you. You didn't even have to do that. We didn't even talk about that before the show. That's just happening live.
Gosh, Dave, though, I wish we had taken the master class before we did our exit. Like, I think we could have done so many things better if we had kind of thought about it more. It kind of just
happened to us. It happened to us, to be honest. And I think we could have done so much more to prepare. you know, and
so
you know.
Laurie, I'm assuming this is something you want to be doing as an entrepreneur in advance. You want to be thinking, hey, it's maybe not this year, the next year, but down the road, this is where I want to be. And this is important information to know now so that you can set yourself up for that acquisition later on.
You said it perfect. That was absolutely perfect. And that's exactly right. That's the anticipation, is if we as entrepreneurs know what builds value, we might make different decisions. You know, when there's a fork in the road, take it, right? Yogi Berra said, well, which way do you go? It's hard to know. And I don't know if you guys are like me and the other entrepreneurs that I've worked with. We're all in our heads a lot. We don't talk about it with people. We worry about things. And so this is a way to get it out of your head, get it on paper, and start a path. And here's the other thing. People go, oh, I don't know if that's what I want to do. Great. No problem. Create pathways, create options. When you have the time to spend on not only maximizing, you know, the number that you can sell for, but also working on the things that may help you maximize the net proceeds. That's the tax advisors you're going to want on your team. That's the financial advisors you're going to want on your team. And so for me, I don't specialize in those areas. I specialize in pulling them all together, and I call it the boat. The business owner advisory team, right? You got your red team. I talked about that. That's specific to the deal. But the boat is somebody that can help you from an advisory standpoint. And what I want to be is the advisor that's helping to get all the rows in the order at the same time. And that's kind of a, you know, another sports analogy, just another quarterback type of role. And my Rolodex is my client's Rolodex. And I think that's really, really important, because a lot of owners are like, I don't know who to talk to. I don't know how to get stuff done. Or I had one client, oh my gosh, he said, he admitted to me, and this is why we started working together. He goes, I've had an operating agreement update on my desk for over a year from my business partner, and it's got coffee stains on it, and it's dog-eared, and it's embarrassing. And he goes, I got to get this off my desk. I've got to work with you. And we've helped him not only take care of that operating agreement, but other things too. And I know that there's can kickers out there listening. They're like, oh, that's me. I'm kicking the can all the time. I have people tell me, and they laugh about it. It's kind of like sad, but funny, where they'll be like, yeah, I told my wife 3 years ago that I was going to work on this stuff. And now it's 3 years later and I haven't worked on it. Ha ha. And I'm like, oh, that's sad. You know, that's just sad. So if we're able to share the message that, you know, and because you asked me the question about myth busting, and I kind of want to go there now. Can I do that?
Yeah, take it away. Take it away.
Okay. So here's the startup myth that I would like to share as a myth bust, is that, and it's really a message for startups as well as more mature companies. Why is it that exit planning, what's your exit strategy, is a question that's really only asked of venture-backed startups, right? If you're a venture-backed startup and you're going to raise money from VCs, you know, in your deck, in your presentation, you have to have an exit strategy, vision, or plan, right? But the everyday entrepreneur, the entrepreneur that's, you know, fighting the good fight and trying to build a business, whether it's for a job or a lifestyle, or if it's for truly, you know, scalability and eventual exit from a intention standpoint, all business owners are going to leave their company one day, right? 100%. It's going to happen. And why is it that the question of what your exit strategy is going to be is only reserved for a small handful? So that's the myth I want to bust, is that it isn't just for the venture-backed startups to be able to answer that question. And I could make the leap and say, yeah, it's a day one question. And the reality is it's a tough day one question. I get that. But why wait 10 years, 20 years to figure that out? And, you know, data in the United States shows that most companies do not make it to their 10th birthday, and they don't make it to their 5th birthday either. And if that mortality rate was acceptable for people, oh my God, right? We would be all over our governments to say, hey, we got to do better here. Yeah. So if a company's going to make it to its longevity, it's going to pass hands, it's creating value, there's so much to understand and do as a business owner. And I want to be that voice that's saying, hey, we support you. We get you. You didn't build your business on your own, and you're not going to have a transition or an exit on your own. So let's get you some help.
Amazing. I love it. Laurie Barkman, the Business Transition Sherpa. Thank you so much for joining us. That's an awesome myth to end the show. Something for you to think about, folks at home, you founders out there. Have an exit strategy, because it's important, and it's probably worth a lot of money. And yeah, guess what? Someday you will not be working at your business. So better figure that out now. I love it. Laurie, thank you so much for joining us. folks, that is another episode of Startup Different. Looking forward to next week where we recap this episode. Till then, follow the pod and, of course, reach out to us on social, and we will see you next week. Hey, you made it all the way to the end of the episode. Nicely done. If you enjoyed this episode, like, comment, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts so the almighty algorithm can help others find us. Want more from Startup Different? Check out our book, Startup Different, the myth-busting blueprint for your multi-million-dollar business. Follow us on social. We're big on YouTube, Instagram, and LinkedIn. You can also check us out at startupdifferent.com. Special thanks for this episode to Graham and our friends at Toronto Podcasts. Visit them at torontopodcast.ca. See you next week.